Imagine you're on a massive, luxurious cruise ship. It's the envy of the world. Gold-plated railings, a Michelin star buffet, and a wellness spa that costs more than your house. But suddenly, the hull is breached. Water is pouring in. The engines are sputtering. The captain rushes to the bridge and slams the emergency repair button. But nothing happens. Why? Because on this specific ship, the emergency protocols state that before you can patch a hole or steer away from an iceberg, all 27 senior officers must agree on the colour of the lifeboats. If just one officer, let's call him Victor, decides he's in a bad mood and refuses to sign the paper until you buy him a new hat, the whole ship goes down. Welcome to the European Union, a geopolitical giant with the decision-making speed of a sloth on tranquilizers. Today, we aren't just talking about recession or inflation. We are looking at the structural, foundational rot that makes the EU incapable of fixing itself. This is the story of how Europe paralysed itself by design. Buckle up. We're doing a deep dive into the bureaucratic nightmare, the economic suicide pacts, and the cultural disconnects that are tearing the old continent apart. This is why Europe can't reform. 1. The Unanimity Trap. If you want to understand why Europe feels like it's perpetually stuck in mud while the US and China race ahead, you have to start in a windowless room in Brussels. It's 3 a.m. The air conditioning is humming, the coffee is stale, and 27 national leaders are staring at each other with pure, unadulterated hatred. They're trying to pass a law. Maybe it's a tax on tech giants. Maybe it's sanctions on a warmongering dictator. Or maybe it's just a statement saying, oh, hey, genocide is bad. It doesn't matter what it is. The problem is how they have to agree on it. This is the Unanimity Trap. In the EU treaties, for the most sensitive, crucial issues, foreign policy, taxation, and the EU budget, every single member state holds a veto. France, with a population of 68 million and a nuclear arsenal, has exactly 1 vote. Malta, with a population of 530,000, which is basically a medium-sized suburb of Dallas, also has 1 vote, and that 1 vote can stop the entire machine dead in its tracks. To really grasp how insane this is, let's take a trip back in history. I want to tell you a ghost story from the 17th century that Europe seems hell-bent on reenacting. Imagine you're a noble in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the year 1652. At the time, this was one of the largest, most powerful states in Europe. It was a massive union of different peoples, but they had a parliamentary rule called the liberum veto. It meant, I do not allow. Any single member of the parliament could stand up, shout ni poswalam, and not only would the current law fail, but the entire session of parliament would be dissolved. All progress would be wiped out because one guy had a bad day, or more likely was bribed by a foreign power. What happened to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth? It became paralysed. It couldn't raise an army. It couldn't collect taxes. Its neighbours, Russia, Prussia and Austria, saw this paralysis, walked in, and carved it up like a Thanksgiving turkey. By 1795, the country literally ceased to exist. It was wiped off the map for 123 years. Fast forward to the 21st century, the EU has essentially copy-pasted the liberum veto into its DNA. Let's look at a concrete, modern example that should make your blood boil. The year is 2022. The global economy is shifting. The United States, the EU, and the OECD have spent years, literal years, negotiating a landmark deal to set a global minimum corporate tax rate of 15%. The goal was to stop massive corporations from shifting profits to tax havens. It was a rare moment of global unity. Everyone was on board. The US was in, Germany was in, France was popping the champagne. But the EU couldn't sign the deal yet. They needed unanimity. Enter Hungary. In June 2022, Hungary vetoed the deal. Did they veto it because they had a deep philosophical objection to the tax policy? No. At the time, Hungary was in a dispute with Brussels over rule of law. Violations. The EU was withholding billions of euros in recovery funds because they were concerned about corruption in Hungary. So, Viktor Orbán, the Prime Minister of Hungary, essentially took the entire global tax system hostage. He looked the EU in the eye and said, "Nice tax deal you have there. It would be a shame if someone vetoed it. Give me my money and I'll lift the veto." It wasn't about economics, it was extortion. And it worked perfectly because the system is designed to allow it. This creates a phenomenon political scientists call the joint decision trap. The more members you add to the club, the harder it becomes to agree on anything. When the EU started as the European Coal and Steel Community, it had 6 members. Getting 6 people to agree on pizza toppings is hard but doable. The EU now has 27 members. Have you ever tried to organise a dinner reservation for 27 people, where one is a vegan, one only eats kosher, one is on the keto diet, and one is actively trying to burn the restaurant down? That is the European Council. And it gets darker. This structural weakness is a magnet for foreign interference. If you are Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping, you don't need to defeat the European Union militarily. You don't even need to win a trade war against the whole bloc. You just need to buy one politician in one small country. If China wants to block an EU statement condemning human rights abuses in Xinjiang, they don't need to convince Berlin or Paris. They just need to put enough investment into Greece or Hungary or Cyprus and then call in a favour. Hey, use your veto. And just like that, the geopolitical superpower of Europe is silenced by a single raised hand. We saw this play out grotesquely in 2020 regarding Belarus. Alexander Lukashenko, the dictator of Belarus, stole an election and started beating protesters in the streets. The EU wanted to impose sanctions. It should have been a slam dunk. Everyone agreed Lukashenko was the bad guy, but Cyprus raised its hand. Not so fast. Cyprus had a beef with Turkey over gas drilling in the Mediterranean. They said, "We will veto the Belarus sanctions unless the EU also sanctions Turkey." So for weeks, while people were being beaten in Minsk, the EU sat on its hands, paralysed, because Nicosia was trying to play 4D chess with Ankara. The world looked at Europe and saw a joke. A giant with clay feet and a brain that can't send signals to its limbs. Now you might be thinking, why don't they just change the rules? Switch to majority voting? That's the ultimate irony. That's the punchline of this tragic joke. To change the EU treaties to get rid of the unanimity rule requires unanimity. You would need every single country, including the ones who use the veto for leverage, to agree to give up their veto. Why would a small country ever do that? The veto is the only thing making them relevant. Without it, they are just a rounding error in Germany's ledger. This paralysis bleeds into everything we're going to talk about in this series. Want to fix the migration crisis? Veto. Want to create a unified energy grid to stop relying on Russian gas? Veto. Want to create a true European army? Veto. The system rewards obstructionism. It incentivizes leaders to be the bad boy of Europe because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Or in this case, the squeaky wheel gets billions of euros in concessions just to stop squeaking for 5 minutes. By the way, if you're enjoying this descent into bureaucratic madness, take a second to hit that subscribe button. It's the only way to ensure I can keep affording the therapy required to research EU tax law. And let me know in the comments, do you think small countries should have the right to veto the big ones? Or is majority rule the only way forward? I read the comments, especially the angry ones. Let's return to the empty chair crisis of 1965 to show you how deep this goes. This isn't a new problem, it's the original sin. Charles de Gaulle of France effectively went on strike, refusing to send French ministers to meetings until he got his way on agricultural funding. He paralysed the community for 6 months. The solution they came up with, the Luxembourg Compromise, was basically a gentleman's agreement to disagree. They kicked the can down the road. Well, 60 years later we have run out of the road. The modern world moves at the speed of fibre optics. Decisions on AI regulation, semiconductor supply chains, and defence spending need to happen in days or weeks, not years. During the 2008 financial crisis, while the US passed TARP, the bailout programme, relatively quickly, Europe spent months arguing in summits that went until 4 a.m, letting the contagion spread from Greece to Italy to Spain. The market learned a valuable lesson then. Betting against the euro is safe because the EU response will always be too little, too late. And this brings us to the most dangerous aspect of the unanimity trap. It creates a culture of lowest common denominator policy. When you have to please everyone, you end up with a watered-down, toothless compromise that solves nothing. It's like trying to design a car that 27 people have to drive simultaneously. You don't get a Ferrari. You don't even get a Toyota. You get a bicycle with square wheels and no handlebars because the handlebars were offensive to the Dutch delegation. Europe thinks of itself as a bastion of democracy, but this mechanism is the most anti-democratic element of its design. It allows the minority, sometimes a minority of one, to tyrannize the majority. In the next section, we're going to look at what happens when you take these paralysed political structures and try to force them to share a bank account. It's the economic equivalent of a shotgun wedding, where the bride is a frugal German accountant and the groom is a Greek philosopher who owes money to the mafia. 2. The Eurozone's original sin. Imagine you decide to move in with your friends. You agree to share a single bank account and a single credit card. But there's a catch. You all keep your separate jobs, you don't pool your salaries, and you have wildly different spending habits. One roommate is Hans. Hans is an obsessive saver, works overtime at a factory, and eats plain oatmeal for dinner to save 50 cents. Another roommate is Costas. Costas loves the good life, works seasonally, and believes that budget is just a French word for suggestion. Now, imagine the bank sets the interest rate for the entire house based on the average of everyone. This is the Eurozone, and it is structurally designed to cause domestic violence. When the euro was launched, it was sold as a utopian dream. One market, one currency. It was supposed to bind Europe together so tightly that war would be impossible and prosperity would be inevitable. But the architects of the euro committed a cardinal sin of economics. They created a monetary union without a fiscal union. Let me break that down because it's the root of almost every economic headline you've read about Europe in the last 15 years. In a normal country, like the USA, if Texas booms while Michigan busts, the federal government acts as a shock absorber. Texans pay more federal taxes, and that money flows to Michigan in the form of unemployment benefits or infrastructure projects. It balances out. The Eurozone has no such mechanism. There is no European treasury that taxes Germans to pay for Greek unemployment benefits. Well, not willingly anyway. Instead, they have one central bank, the ECB in Frankfurt, setting one interest rate for 20 different economies that are often moving in completely different directions. Here is the nightmare scenario that played out in the 2000s. Germany was the sick man of Europe in the early 2000s. It needed low interest rates to stimulate its economy. Meanwhile, countries in the south, Greece, Spain, Ireland, were booming. They needed high interest rates to cool down inflation and stop housing bubbles. So what did the ECB do? They set interest rates low. This was perfect for Germany. It helped them recover. But for Spain and Greece, it was like pouring gasoline on a bonfire. Suddenly borrowing money in Athens was as cheap as borrowing money in Berlin. The Greeks and Spaniards went on a borrowing binge. Why wouldn't they? It was free money. They bought Porsches, built massive airports in the middle of nowhere, and inflated housing bubbles that would make 2008 Florida look like a model of restraint. German banks were all too happy to lend them the money. Hans the Saver was basically funding Costas's party, thinking, hey, we use the same currency, so the risk is the same, right? Wrong. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, the tide went out, and we discovered who was swimming naked. The southern economies crashed. In the old days, before the euro, Italy or Greece would have a simple solution: devalue the currency. They would print more lira or drachma, making their currency cheaper. This would make their exports super competitive and their tourism cheap. Foreigners would flock in, buy cheap Italian wine, and the economy would bounce back. But under the euro, they couldn't devalue. They didn't control the money printer anymore, Frankfurt did. And Frankfurt wasn't going to devalue the euro just to save Greece, because that would hurt German savings. So trapped in the euro straitjacket, the southern countries had to do the only thing left: internal devaluation. That is a polite economist term for destroying the lives of your citizens. If you can't make your currency cheaper, you have to make your people cheaper. You have to slash wages, fire public sector workers, cut pensions and raise taxes. This led to the Greek Depression, which was actually deeper and longer than the US Great Depression of the 1930s. We saw youth unemployment in Spain hit 50%. Imagine that. Half of all young people, waking up every day with absolutely no prospect of a job, stuck in their parents' basement, not because they are lazy, but because a central banker in Germany prioritized price stability over their livelihoods. This created a permanent divergence. The euro acts like a massive vacuum cleaner that sucks capital from the south and deposits it in the north. Germany gets an artificially cheap currency. If Germany still used the Deutschmark, it would be extremely strong, expensive, making German BMWs hard to sell abroad. But because the German economy is weighed down by the weaker southern economies, the euro stays weaker than a pure German currency would be. This is a massive subsidy to German exporters. They get to sell cars to the world at a discount, while the South is stuck with a currency that is too expensive for their productivity levels. It's a rigged game, not because of a conspiracy, but because of math. You cannot lock a Ferrari and a tractor together and expect them to drive at the same speed without ripping the axle apart. And the political fallout? Toxic. The Germans feel like they are constantly bailing out lazy Southerners. Their words, often found in tabloids like Bild. The Southerners feel like they are living under a German Fourth Reich of economic austerity. Their words, often seen on protest signs in Athens. Instead of bringing Europe together, the euro has turned neighbour against neighbour. It revived national stereotypes that we thought died in 1945. Every time there is a crisis, the solution is a bailout that is really just a loan to pay off the previous loan, kicking the can down the road while the debt pile grows higher. The Eurozone is not a union, it's a debt collection agency masquerading as a continent. And until they either become a full federal state, which voters hate, or break up the currency, which would cause a financial apocalypse, they are stuck in this zombie-like limbo. But the currency is just the mechanism. To understand why the gap between the North and South is unbridgeable, we have to look at the economic DNA of the countries themselves. Why does the North save and the South spend? Is it culture, or is it something much harder to fix? 3. The North-South economic divorce. If you look at a map of Europe, there is an invisible line that cuts the continent in half. It's not the old Iron Curtain. It's not a religious divide between Catholics and Protestants. It is the olive oil versus butter line. South of the line, in Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, people cook with olive oil, the sun shines, and life is lived outdoors. North of the line, in Germany, the Netherlands, Finland, people cook with butter. The sky's a permanent shade of grey, and life is strictly regulated by clocks and calendars. For centuries, this was just a cultural quirk. But in the European Union, this line has become a battle trench. This is the North-South economic divorce, and the couple is currently screaming at each other in the divorce lawyer's office while the house burns down. The media often simplifies this conflict into a morality play. You've heard the stereotypes. The northern saints, frugal, hardworking, efficient, versus the southern sinners, lazy, tax-evading, siesta-taking. In the mid-2010s, Dutch Finance Minister Jeroen Dijsselbloem famously said that southern countries shouldn't spend all their money on drinks and women and then ask for help. That quote almost broke the union. It perfectly encapsulated the northern mindset. We are rich because we are virtuous. You are poor because you are irresponsible. But as with most messy divorces, the truth is far darker and more complicated. Let's look at the frugal four: the Netherlands, Austria, Denmark, Sweden, plus Germany. These economies are built on export mercantilism. They suppress their own domestic wages to keep their products cheap, and then they export massive amounts of goods to the rest of the world. Germany specifically is an export addict. It relies on people in other countries buying its Mercedes and Siemens turbines. Now look at Club Med, Italy, Spain, Greece, Portugal. These economies rely heavily on domestic consumption, tourism, and services. They historically have higher inflation and less efficient tax collection, but they also have high private wealth. Italians, for example, often own their homes outright, unlike Germans who mostly rent. Here is the dirty secret the North doesn't want you to know. The North needs the South's debt. You cannot have a surplus without someone else having a deficit. It is a mathematical impossibility. If Germany is selling more than it buys, running a surplus, someone else must be buying more than they sell, running a deficit. For decades, the South bought German goods. They bought them using cheap loans provided by northern banks. It was a symbiotic relationship. The North got a market for its factories, and the South got cheap financing for its lifestyle. But when the credit card bill came due, the North suddenly acted shocked that the South was in debt. Let's zoom in on Italy to see how tragic this divorce has become. Italy used to be an economic miracle. In the 80s and early 90s, the Italian economy was vibrant. They were the masters of small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, high-end fashion, specialized machinery, luxury furniture. But Italy's business model relied on the ability to devalue the lira to stay competitive against German efficiency. Once they entered the euro, they lost that tool. But they also failed to modernize. Italy is structurally allergic to big business. It is a nation of tiny, family-owned firms. These are great for craftsmanship, but terrible for productivity. You can't achieve economies of scale when your CEO is your uncle, and the HR department is your grandmother. While Germany spent the 2000s digitizing and integrating into global supply chains, Italy stagnated. Italy's GDP per capita today is roughly the same as it was in 1999. Let that sink in. An entire generation has seen zero economic growth. Imagine you started working in 1999, and today, 26 years later, the average person in your country is no richer than when you started. That is a recipe for political radicalization. The result is a debt trap that is mathematically impossible to escape. Greece has a debt-to-GDP ratio of around 160%. Italy is around 140%. These numbers are suffocating. Every year, these countries have to spend a massive chunk of their budget just paying interest on old debt. That's money that isn't going to schools, hospitals, or infrastructure. So the North demands austerity. They say, cut spending, raise taxes, be more like us. But here is the paradox. When you force a depressed economy to cut spending, the economy shrinks even more. So the debt-to-GDP ratio actually goes up because the GDP, the denominator, falls faster than the debt, the numerator. Europe spent the last decade proving that you cannot cut your way to growth. It's like trying to lose weight by cutting off your leg. Yes, the number on the scale goes down, but you are now crippled. And then there is the Target 2 system. This is the technical bombshell that keeps central bankers awake at night. Target 2 is the payment system of the Eurozone. When a Greek bank transfers money to a German bank to buy a Volkswagen, it goes through this system. Because of the trade imbalances, the southern central banks owe massive amounts of money to the German central bank, the Bundesbank. As of recently, the Bundesbank has a Target 2 claim of over $1 trillion. This is essentially an overdraft facility that the South has maxed out. If the euro were to break apart tomorrow, if Italy said ciao and went back to the lira, that $1 trillion would vanish. Poof, gone. This means Germany is trapped too. They are the angry creditor who can't afford to let the debtor die. They have to keep Italy on life support, not out of charity, but to protect their own balance sheet. This creates a toxic political environment. In the north, voters are furious. They see their taxes going to bailouts, even though technically most bailouts are loans. The rise of the far-right in Germany, AfD, and the Netherlands, PVV, is partly fueled by the sentiment, why are we paying for Italian retirees? In the south, voters are equally furious. They see their hospitals crumbling and their children emigrating because of German dictates. They feel like colonies, not partners. The rise of populism in Italy and Spain is fueled by, why is Berlin telling us how to live? There is a profound linguistic barrier here that summarizes the problem perfectly. In German, the word for debt is Schuld. The word for guilt is also Schuld. In the German moral universe, to be in debt is to be guilty. It is a moral failing. In the Southern Catholic tradition, debt is a misfortune, something to be forgiven. Think of the Jubilee or the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts. You're trying to run a monetary union between a culture that views debt as a sin and a culture that views debt as a tool. It cannot work without a massive transfer of wealth that the North refuses to sign off on. So we have a stalemate. The South cannot grow because of the debt. The North cannot collect because the South can't pay. Instead of a divorce, they are living in the same house, sleeping in separate bedrooms, and poisoning each other's food. And while they argue over pennies, the global economy is moving on. The US and China are investing trillions in AI and green tech, while Europe argues about pension ages and fiscal rules from the 1990s. Quick question for the comments. If you lend your friend money knowing they have a gambling problem and they lose it all, whose fault is it? Is it the irresponsible borrower or the enabler lender? Because that is the trillion euro question facing the EU right now. Let me know who you side with. Team North or Team South? This economic divorce is bad enough, but it is being made 10 times worse by the sheer, suffocating weight of the rulebook they are forced to play by. In the next section, we're going to leave the depressing world of debt and enter the infuriating world of red tape. We're going to look at why Europe regulates everything, including the curve of cucumbers and the size of clams, and how this obsession with rules is strangling the only thing that could save them: innovation. 4. Brussels' bureaucratic labyrinth. Imagine for a second that you have invented a teleportation device. You're a genius engineer living in 2025. You push a button and zap, you travel from Paris to Berlin instantly. It's going to change the world. It will end the need for cars, planes, and fossil fuels. It is the greatest invention in human history. Now, let's see what happens next. If you're in Silicon Valley, a venture capitalist in a fleece vest throws $50 million at you, you hire a team, and within 6 months, Teleport is a unicorn company. If you are in the European Union, you receive a letter from the European Commission. Before you can teleport a single person, you must complete a strategic environmental assessment to determine if the teleportation particles disturb the migration patterns of the lesser spotted woodpecker. Then, you need to comply with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, because deconstructing a human body technically counts as processing personal data, and you need explicit consent from every atom. Then, the AI Act kicks in. Your teleportation algorithm is classified as high risk, requiring a conformity assessment by a third-party auditor that takes 18 months. Finally, France demands that 40% of the teleportation energy must be nuclear, while Germany demands it must be solar, and since you can't satisfy both, your startup runs out of money, you go bankrupt, and 2 years later, a Chinese company steals your blueprints and launches the product globally. Welcome to the bureaucratic labyrinth. While America innovates and China replicates, Europe regulates. There is an old joke in geopolitical circles: the US innovates, China copies, and Europe regulates. It used to be a joke. Now, it is the official industrial strategy of the continent. Europe has convinced itself that it can be a regulatory superpower. Since they can't build the biggest tech companies, they will build the biggest rulebooks. They call this the Brussels effect. The idea is that because the EU is a massive market, if they set a strict rule, like all charging cables must be USB-C, multinational companies will just adopt that rule globally, because it's cheaper than making two different products. And sure, getting Apple to switch to USB-C was a nice win for consumers. But when you apply this mindset to the entire economy, you strangle the future before it is born. The core of this problem is a philosophical concept called the precautionary principle. This is enshrined in EU law. It states that if an action or policy has a suspected risk of causing harm to the public or the environment, the burden of proof that it is not harmful falls on those taking the action. Sounds reasonable, right? Better safe than sorry. But in practice, it means guilty until proven innocent for innovation. In the US, the approach is generally, you can do it until we find out it's dangerous. This allows for rapid experimentation. In the EU, the approach is, you cannot do it until you prove to us in triplicate that there is a 0% chance of anything going wrong. If we had applied the precautionary principle to the invention of fire, we would still be eating raw meat in the dark because fire carries a risk of burns. Let's look at the most famous example, the GDPR. The General Data Protection Regulation was hailed as the gold standard for privacy. It was supposed to protect citizens from big tech. What did it actually do? It broke the internet. Now, every time you open a website, you are assaulted by a cookie banner that requires a PhD to understand. You just click Accept All because you want to read the damn recipe for lasagna. It didn't empower users, it annoyed them. But the economic damage was worse. A study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that after GDPR was introduced, investment in European tech ventures dropped significantly compared to the US. Why? Because compliance is expensive. If you are Google or Meta, you have an army of 500 lawyers. You can afford to comply with GDPR. It's a rounding error on your balance sheet. But if you are a small European startup with 3 employees trying to build a new ad tech platform, you can't afford the lawyers. You look at the fines, which can be 4% of global turnover, and you say, forget it. The irony is tragic. GDPR actually strengthened the monopoly of big tech. It wiped out their smaller European competitors who couldn't handle the regulatory burden. Europe tried to kill the giants and ended up building a moat around them, and they are doing it again right now with the AI Act. Europe is currently patting itself on the back for passing the world's first comprehensive AI law. Politicians are popping champagne in Brussels, giving speeches about ethical AI and human-centric digital future. Meanwhile, the actual AI industry is fleeing. Mistral, a French AI company and one of Europe's only hopes to rival OpenAI, lobbied desperately against the strict regulations, warning that it would kill their ability to compete. They were largely ignored. The EU is regulating generative AI models that barely exist yet. They are building traffic lights for flying cars that haven't been invented. The result? The next ChatGPT will not come from Europe. It can't. The soil is too toxic for it to grow. Let's descend into the absurdity of the official journal of the European Union. This is the book where all EU laws are written. It currently has over 100,000 pages of active legislation. There are regulations on the curvature of bananas, Commission Regulation EC, number 257-94. There are regulations on the size of clams. There are regulations on how to climb a ladder. My favourite is the regulation on marketing standards for bottled water. At one point, the EU famously tried to ban producers from claiming that drinking water prevents dehydration, because there wasn't a scientific consensus filed with the proper committee. I wish I was joking. They eventually walked that one back after being laughed at by the entire planet, but it shows the mindset. This obsession with micromanagement creates a compliance culture. If you run a business in Europe, you don't spend your day thinking, how can I make a better product? You spend your day thinking, am I compliant with Directive 2024/XYZ? You hire compliance officers, not engineers. You hire auditors, not designers. And this bleeds into the physical world too. Look at the German construction sector. Germany is famous for efficiency, right? Well, try to build an airport in Berlin. The Berlin-Brandenburg Airport, BR, was supposed to open in 2011. It opened in 2020, 9 years late. Billions over budget. Why? Because of regulations. At one point, the fire safety system was so complex that the computers couldn't control it, so they proposed hiring 800 humans to stand by the doors and act as human fire detectors. Then, while they were fixing that, the regulations changed. The cables they had installed were now non-compliant. They had to rip out miles of cabling and start over. It became a monument to bureaucratic failure. A modern Tower of Babel destroyed not by God, but by the building code. This is the bureaucratic labyrinth. It is a system where the process is more important than the outcome. The people running the system, the Eurocrats in the Berlaymont building in Brussels, are highly educated, well-meaning, and completely detached from reality. They earn tax-free salaries. Yes, EU officials pay a special, very low community tax, and have never run a business in their lives. They view the market as a wild beast that must be tamed, caged, and sedated. They don't understand that the beast is also the engine that pulls the cart. If you sedate the beast too much, the cart stops moving. And the cart has stopped moving. Europe's share of the global economy is shrinking. In 2008, the EU economy was slightly larger than the US economy. Today, the US economy is nearly 50% larger than the EU. That is a staggering collapse in relative wealth in just 15 years, and a huge part of that is self-inflicted. It is the cost of the paperwork. It is the cost of the waiting periods. It is the cost of the no. Europe has become the continent of no. Can we drill for gas? No. Climate regulation. Can we build a data center? No. Energy regulation. Can we use GMO crops to increase yield? No. Food safety regulation. Can we merge these two companies to compete with China? No. Competition regulation. Eventually, the innovators stop asking. They just buy a plane ticket to San Francisco, Singapore, or Austin. We're going to talk about that brain drain later, but first, we have to look at an even more existential threat. Because you can fix bad laws, you can repeal regulations, but there is one thing you cannot fix with a stroke of a pen. You cannot fix a continent that is running out of people. I know at least one of you watching has had to click reject all on a cookie banner today. Does that regulation actually make you feel safer or just more annoyed? Tell me in the comments if you think the Brussels effect is protecting us or just wasting our time. I read every comment that isn't written by a bot. In the next section, we're going to look at the demographic death spiral. We're going to talk about empty cradles, grey hair, and the terrifying math of a welfare state that has run out of children to pay for it. 5. The demographic death spiral. Picture this. It's a warm Tuesday afternoon in a picturesque village in the Italian region of Calabria. The sun is shining on the terracotta roofs. The olive trees are swaying in the breeze. You walk into the main piazza, expecting to see kids kicking a soccer ball, teenagers flirting on mopeds, the noise of life. Instead, you hear nothing. The shutters are closed. The school was converted into a nursing home 3 years ago. The only sound is the click-clack of a cane against the cobblestones as an 85-year-old widow walks to the pharmacy. This isn't the set of a post-apocalyptic movie. This is the reality of modern Europe. Europe is dying. I don't mean that metaphorically or culturally, I mean it biologically. The people of Europe have stopped reproducing, and the continent is rapidly turning into a massive open-air retirement home with excellent public transit. This is the demographic death spiral, and it is the single biggest threat to the European project. Bigger than Putin, bigger than debt, bigger than bureaucracy. Because you can fix a budget deficit. You cannot fix a country that has forgotten how to make babies. To understand the scale of this disaster, you need to know one number, 2.1. This is the replacement rate. It's the average number of children a woman needs to have for a population to remain stable. If you are above 2.1, your country grows. If you are below 2.1, your country shrinks. The European Union's average fertility rate is roughly 1.46. In Spain and Italy, it's hovering around 1.2. That isn't a decline. That is a collapse. It is a mathematical guarantee that the next generation will be roughly half the size of the current one. We are witnessing the inversion of the population pyramid. For all of human history, society looked like a pyramid. A huge base of young people supporting a small tip of old people. This worked great for things like pensions and healthcare. You had 5 or 6 workers chipping in to pay for grandma's retirement. Today, Europe looks less like a pyramid and more like a coffin. The base is tiny. The top is massive. In Germany, the engine of Europe, they are running out of the raw material of capitalism. Humans. The country is losing its workforce at a rate of roughly 400,000 people per year. That is a medium-sized city vanishing from the labour market every single year. This creates the pension Ponzi scheme. Modern welfare states are built on a Ponzi principle. The new investors, young workers, pay the returns to the old investors, retirees. This works as long as the population keeps growing. But when the population shrinks, the math breaks instantly. Right now, in Europe, we are approaching a ratio of 2 workers for every 1 retiree. Soon it will be 1-to-1. Imagine that. Imagine half of your paycheck being taxed just to keep the lights on in the nursing homes. What happens to your ability to buy a house? To start a business? To have kids of your own? It vanishes. This creates a vicious cycle. Taxes go up to pay for the elderly. Young people have less money. Young people can't afford kids. The birth rate drops further. Taxes go up again. Let's look at Italy again, because Italy is effectively the ghost of Christmas future for the rest of the world. Italy currently has more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 15. It is the second oldest country in the world, right behind Japan. But unlike Japan, Italy doesn't have the robots to take care of the elderly. In Italy, they have a word for men in their 30s who still live with their mothers, bamboccioni, big babies. It sounds funny, a bit of a cultural joke about Italian mamas cooking pasta. But it's actually a tragic economic indicator. These men aren't living at home because they love their mum's laundry service. They are living at home because the youth unemployment rate is sky high, salaries are stagnant and rents are impossible. If you are 33, living in your childhood bedroom, working on a temporary contract for $100-200 a month, you are not thinking about starting a family. You're thinking about survival. The result? Empty cradles. In 2023, Italy recorded the lowest number of births since the unification of the country in 1861. Fewer babies were born in modern, peaceful Italy than were born during the bombings of World War II, and this leads to a phenomenon called gerontocracy, rule by the old. Demographics is destiny, but it's also democracy. Old people vote, young people don't. When the median voter is 55 years old, what kind of policies do politicians push? Do they push for high-risk investment in AI startups? No. Do they push for radical education reform? No. They push for pension protection and healthcare spending and keeping property prices high. Europe has become a continent designed to protect the assets of the elderly at the expense of the future of the young. This explains the risk aversion we talked about earlier. Old people are biologically wired to be more risk-averse. They have assets to protect, they don't want disruption, they want stability. If you wonder why Europe bans Uber to protect taxi drivers or regulates AI to death, look at the age of the voters. They aren't interested in the gig economy. They want things to stay exactly the way they were in 1990. This creates a cultural stagnation that feels like a heavy blanket over the continent. Walking through Berlin or Paris or Rome, you feel the weight of history, which is beautiful, but you also feel the absence of the future. The continent is becoming a museum. It's a very nice museum. The cafe culture is great, the architecture is stunning, and the art is world-class. But museums are places you visit, not places where the future is invented. Compare this to the United States. The US has demographic problems too, but they are solved by two things: slightly higher birth rates and, crucially, a massive ability to assimilate immigrants, which we will discuss later. The US median age is 38. Germany's is 45. That 7-year gap is the difference between a society that looks forward and one that looks backward. Or look at Africa. The median age in Nigeria is 18. The future of the world's workforce is African. Europe is right next door, wealthy and aging, sitting across the Mediterranean from a continent that is young and hungry. This dynamic, the old rich man living next to the young poor man, is the fundamental geopolitical tension of the 21st century for Europe. But wait, can't we just solve this with automation? Can't robots wipe the bottoms of the boomers? Maybe. But Europe is lagging in tech, see Section 7. So the only short-term solution is immigration. And here lies the ultimate paradox. Europe needs millions of immigrants to keep its pension system from collapsing. Germany alone needs 400,000 net immigrants every single year just to maintain its current workforce. But politically, Europe is becoming more anti-immigrant by the day. The rise of the far right in France, Germany, Italy and the Netherlands is driven largely by a rejection of migration. The native populations are shrinking and they feel like they are being replaced, a sentiment that fuels dangerous conspiracy theories but stems from the very real math of demographic shifts. So you have an economic necessity colliding head-on with political reality. The economy is screaming, let them in, while the voters are screaming, keep them out. The result is a paralyzed system that lets in just enough people to anger the nativists, but not enough, or not the right kind, to solve the economic crisis. It creates a permanent state of social friction. There is a terrifying statistic from the healthcare sector. In the UK, which suffers the same disease, the NHS is the biggest employer. As the population ages, the demand for healthcare becomes infinite. There is a theory that eventually the entire European economy will just be people caring for other, older people, a one nurse to one patient economy. That is not an economy that goes to Mars. That is not an economy that invents the iPhone. That is an economy of palliative care. The death spiral is hard to reverse. Once you fall into the low fertility trap, social norms change. If none of your friends have kids, you don't have kids. A society without children becomes less child-friendly. You start seeing child-free zones in cafes and hotels. The noise of playing children is seen as a nuisance rather than the sound of the future. Europe is essentially eating its own seed corn. It lived the good life for 70 years, building generous welfare states and taking month-long vacations. But it forgot to invest in the one thing that makes it all sustainable, the next generation. And now the bill is due. This is some heavy stuff, I know. But look around your own circle. How many of your friends are planning to have 3 kids? How many are struggling just to take care of a dog? Let me know in the comments. Is the cost of living the real birth control? Or have our priorities just shifted? Now, if a shrinking workforce wasn't bad enough, let's talk about how Europe decided to power its dying industries. Because if there is one thing dumber than running out of people, it's voluntarily turning off your own energy supply and handing the keys to a guy named Vladimir. In the next section, we are going to explore the Great Energy Suicide. 6. The Great Energy Suicide. Imagine you are the CEO of a massive chemical company. You make the plastic that goes into everything from medical IV bags to Lego bricks. Your factory is the size of a small city. It consumes as much electricity as Denmark. For 40 years, your business model was simple. You buy incredibly cheap natural gas from a pipeline connected to Russia, you use German engineering to turn it into high-value products, and you sell them to China. Everyone wins. The shareholders are happy, the workers drive Mercedes, and the politicians get re-elected. Then, one day in February 2022, the guy selling you the gas decides to invade his neighbour. The pipeline blows up, literally. The price of your energy jumps 1,000% overnight. Suddenly you realise that your entire business model, your entire national economy, was built on a handshake with a former KGB agent, This is the great energy suicide. If demographics is a slow cancer, Europe's energy policy was a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the foot. It is a masterclass in how to prioritise ideology over math and wishful thinking over geopolitical reality. To understand how Europe got here, we have to look at the Geopolitical Darwin Award winner of the century, Germany's Energiewende, energy transition. In the early 2000s, Germany decided it wanted to be the greenest industrial power on Earth, a noble goal. They subsidised massive amounts of wind and solar, but they had a problem. The wind doesn't always blow, and the sun doesn't shine at night, a fact that seems to have shocked the planners. You need baseload power, steady, reliable energy to keep the factories humming when it's cloudy. They had two choices for baseload power that doesn't produce CO2. Nuclear power. There is no number. 2. It's just nuclear. Germany had some of the safest, most efficient nuclear power plants in the world. They were money-printing machines that produced zero carbon. But in 2011, a tsunami hit the Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. Now, last time I checked, the risk of a massive tsunami hitting Bavaria is zero. But Angela Merkel, a physicist by training who should have known better, panicked. Facing political pressure from the Green Party, she announced that Germany would phase out all its nuclear plants. This was the fatal error. They turned off their clean, reliable baseload power, but they still needed electricity. So what did they do? They replaced nuclear with coal and Russian gas. Yes, you heard that right. In the name of saving the planet, Germany shut down zero-carbon nuclear plants and fired up dirty lignite coal plants. They bulldozed ancient forests and even demolished a wind farm to expand a coal mine. You cannot make this stuff up. It is irony so thick you could cut it with a knife. But coal was just the backup. The main plan was gas, cheap, plentiful gas from Russia. This was the doctrine of Wandel durch Handel, change through trade. The idea was that if Europe bought enough gas from Russia, Russia would become dependent on the money, modernise and eventually turn into a nice liberal democracy. It was a beautiful theory. It was also completely wrong. Vladimir Putin didn't see the gas pipelines as a commercial partnership. He saw them as a leash, and Europe eagerly put the collar around its own neck. Germany built Nord Stream 1, and then, despite warnings from everyone, doubled down with Nord Stream 2. Do you remember the video from the UN General Assembly in 2018? Donald Trump stood up and warned Germany that they would become totally dependent on Russian energy. The German delegation was caught on camera laughing. They smirked. They rolled their eyes at the silly American cowboy. Well, nobody is laughing now. When the tanks rolled into Ukraine, the trap snapped shut. Europe was caught with its pants down. They scrambled to buy LNG, liquefied natural gas, from the US and Qatar, paying a premium that wrecked their trade balance. But the real tragedy isn't just the high prices, it's deindustrialization. Energy is the master resource. It is the cost of doing anything. If your energy is 3 times more expensive than your competitors in Texas or Shanghai, you cannot compete. Period. We are now seeing the hollowing out of European industry. Look at BASF. They are the largest chemical producer in the world. Their headquarters in Ludwigshafen, Germany, is the beating heart of European industry. They are now permanently downsizing in Europe and building a massive $10 billion complex in China. Why? Because China has cheap energy, mostly coal, and doesn't care about the regulations we discussed in the last section. The CEO of BASF was blunt. He said Europe is becoming uninvestable. This is terrifying. When the factories leave, the high-paying engineering jobs leave, the tax revenue leaves, the innovation leaves. And what replaced the factories? Europe is pivoting to green tech. But wait, who makes the solar panels? China. Who makes the batteries? China. Who processes the lithium? China. So Europe traded dependency on Russian gas for dependency on Chinese renewables. They swapped a drug dealer for a loan shark. Let's contrast this with France. France is the kid in class who actually did the homework. In the 1970s, after the oil crisis, France said, "We don't have oil, we don't have gas, but we have brains." The Mesmer Plan led to the construction of a massive fleet of nuclear reactors. Today, France's electricity grid is one of the cleanest in the world. While Germany was burning coal and panic buying gas, France was sitting pretty. Mostly. They had some maintenance issues, but the structural advantage is undeniable. But because of the European electricity market, France suffers too. The EU has a pricing mechanism called the merit order. It's complicated, but the simple version is this. The price of electricity for the entire market is set by the most expensive source needed to meet demand. Because Germany needed expensive gas to keep the lights on, the price of electricity skyrocketed for everyone, including the French who were using cheap nuclear and the Spanish who were using cheap solar. It's like going to a restaurant with a group. You order a salad. Your friend orders the lobster and caviar tower, and the waiter splits the bill evenly. You're paying for Germany's lobster. This energy suicide has shattered the social contract of European industry. The deal was, we accept heavy taxes and strict regulations, and in exchange, the government provides stable infrastructure and cheap infrastructure. The government failed its side of the deal. Now let's look at the Green Deal. The EU wants to be the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. They are banning the sale of combustion engine cars by 2035. They are imposing carbon taxes on imports, CBAM. These are ambitious goals, but without a coherent energy strategy, they are just dreams. You cannot force everyone to drive electric cars if you don't have enough electricity to charge them. You cannot switch to heat pumps if the electricity costs a fortune. The result is a backlash. We are seeing farmers spraying manure on government buildings in Brussels. We are seeing the rise of greenlash voters who say, I want to save the planet, but I also want to be able to afford heating in February. The US, meanwhile, took a different approach. The Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, is all carrots and no sticks. The US government is just throwing massive subsidies at green tech. Here, have some money, build a factory. Europe's approach is all sticks. Tax this, ban that, regulate this. Capital goes where it is treated best. Right now, green capital is fleeing Europe for the US. Europe is effectively becoming an industrial museum, a place where you can come to see how cars used to be made before the factories moved to Tennessee or Guangdong. And the darkest part? It didn't have to be this way. Europe has domestic gas reserves, fracking that it refuses to touch due to environmental concerns. It has the technology for nuclear. It has the engineering talent. It chose this path. It chose to outsource its energy security to dictators because it felt morally superior to shut down nuclear plants. It's a cautionary tale for the ages. You cannot run a 21st century economy on 19th century windmills and 20th century geopolitics. I know, this is frustrating to watch. If you're from Germany, I'm genuinely curious. How do you feel about the nuclear phase out now, looking back? Was it worth it? And for everyone else, hit that like button if you enjoy heating your home without taking out a second mortgage. But wait, surely Europe can pivot. If the old industries are dying, surely they are building the new ones. The internet, AI, biotech, the digital frontier. Well, about that. In the next section, we're going to play a game called Name a European Tech Giant. Spoiler alert, you can't. We are going to explore why the next Google, Amazon or Nvidia will almost certainly not be born in the EU. 7. Where are the European tech giants? Let's play a game. It's very simple. I want you to name a global technology company founded in the last 20 years that you use every single day. Go ahead. You probably said Google, Apple, Facebook, Meta, Amazon, Netflix, or maybe Tesla. Where are they from? The United States. Maybe you said TikTok. Where is it from? China. Maybe you are a gamer and said Sony or Nintendo. Where are they from? Japan. Now, name a European one. Did you say Spotify? Okay, I'll give you that one. Spotify is the pride of Sweden. But who else? Skype, sold to Microsoft. Booking.com, owned by an American conglomerate. DeepMind, the brilliant British AI lab, bought by Google. This is the tech void. We are living through the greatest accumulation of wealth and power in human history, driven by the digital revolution. And Europe is essentially a spectator sitting in the bleachers, watching the US and China play the game. To understand how catastrophic this failure is, look at the market capitalization numbers. They are absolutely brutal. In 2024, the market cap of the magnificent 7 US tech stocks, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, Tesla, is larger than the stock markets of the UK, France, Germany and China combined. Apple alone is worth more than the entire French stock market, the CAC 40. Think about that. One company in Cupertino, California, is worth more than LVMH, Total Energies, Airbus, Sanofi, and every other major French corporation put together. Why? Why can't a continent with world-class universities, a history of scientific discovery, the World Wide Web was invented at CERN in Switzerland for God's sake, and a market of 450 million rich consumers build a single Google? The answer lies in a toxic cocktail of culture, capital, and fragmentation. Let's start with the capital problem. Imagine you're a 22-year-old computer science dropout in Palo Alto. You have a crazy idea to use AI to map the entire ocean floor. You walk into a venture capital firm on Sand Hill Road. You're wearing a hoodie, you have no revenue, you just have a pitch deck and a dream. The American VC looks at you and thinks, if this kid is right, this is $1 trillion company. If he's wrong, I lose a few million. Worth the risk. They write you a check for $5 million. Now imagine you're that same 22-year-old in Paris or Berlin. You walk into a European bank or investment firm. You're wearing a suit because you were told to look professional. The European investor looks at you and asks, where are your last 3 years of audited tax returns? What is your projected EBITDA for Q3 2026? And can you put up your parents' house as collateral? Europe doesn't have a venture capital culture, it has a loan culture. Banks lend money to people who can prove they don't need it. Venture capitalists give money to people who might burn it. Europe is terrified of burning money. As a result, they never ignite the rocket. There is a saying in the Valley, hardware is hard, but in Europe, software is impossible. Europe is actually quite good at old tech. The German Mittelstand makes the best specialized machinery in the world, and let's not forget ASML in the Netherlands. They are arguably the most important company on earth right now because they make the machines that make chips, but ASML was founded in 1984. It is an industrial hardware company. It is B2B, business to business. Europe fails at B2C, business to consumer platforms. They missed the social media wave, they missed the cloud wave, they missed the smartphone wave. Remember Nokia, RIP. And now they are actively missing the AI wave. This brings us to the cultural problem. In Silicon Valley, failure is a badge of honor. You pitch your startup, you say, my last 2 companies went bankrupt, and the investors nod. They think, great, he learned his lesson, he won't make those mistakes again. In Europe, bankruptcy is a scarlet letter. If you go bankrupt in France or Germany, you're stigmatized. It can be hard to get a credit card, let alone another round of funding. You're seen as reckless. This creates a culture of extreme risk aversion. The smartest graduates from the Sorbonne or Technical University of Munich don't dream of starting a risky company in a garage. They dream of working for Siemens, LVMH, or even better, becoming a government bureaucrat with job security for life. There is also the phenomenon known as tall poppy syndrome. In many European cultures, especially Scandinavia and the UK, if you stand out too much, if you are too ambitious, society tries to cut you down to size. Who do you think you are? In America, if you say, I want to go to Mars, people call you Elon Musk. In Europe, if you say, I want to go to Mars, people ask if you filled out the proper exit visa forms and warn you about the carbon footprint of the rocket. Then we have the salary gap. If you're a top-tier AI engineer, you are the Lionel Messi of the intellectual world. You can play anywhere. Google in Zurich or London pays well, but Google in Mountain View pays better, and more importantly in the US you get stock options, equity, that can make you a millionaire overnight. In Europe, employee stock options are often taxed as a regular income, sometimes before you can even sell them. It is a tax policy designed to prevent people from getting rich. So, the talent leaves. We call this the brain drain, more on that in section 13, but for the tech sector it is a hemorrhage. The chief AI scientist at Meta, Yann LeCun, he's French. The co-founder of DeepMind, Mustafa Suleyman, he's British. They are building the future, but they are doing it with American capital, on American soil. And finally, the acquisition trap. Let's say you actually manage to build a successful European tech company. You reach a $1 billion valuation. You are a unicorn. What happens next? In the US, you go public, IPO, and try to become a $100 billion company. In Europe, you sell to an American company. DeepMind was British, bought by Google. Skype was Swedish-Danish, bought by Microsoft. ARM, the chip designer, is British, owned by SoftBank Japan and listed in New York. Europe acts as an incubator for America. They do the hard work of educating brilliant scientists, funding the early research, and then, just when the value is about to explode, the US swoops in with a checkbook and buys the harvest. Why do they sell? Because they can't scale in Europe. This is the scale-up problem. It is relatively easy to start a company in Europe today, thanks to some reforms, but it is impossible to grow it. If you launch an app in the US, you instantly have access to 330 million people who speak English, use the dollar, and follow the same federal laws. If you launch an app in Europe, you have the French market, 68 million. Then, to expand to Germany, you need to translate everything, hire German lawyers, comply with German labour laws, and deal with a different tax authority. Then, you want to go to Italy. Do it all again. The digital single market is a myth. It doesn't exist. So the European founder hits a glass ceiling at around 100 million users. To break through, they have to move to the US anyway, so they just sell. And what is the EU's response to this lack of tech giants? As we discussed, regulation. The EU seems to believe that if they fine Google enough money, a European Google will magically appear from the ashes. They have levied billions of dollars in fines against US tech giants for antitrust violations. Margrethe Vestager, the former competition commissioner, was known as the tax lady by Donald Trump. She was a hero in Brussels. But did those fines create a European competitor? No. Did breaking up the browser monopoly give us a French Chrome? No. It just made the American companies treat Europe as a cost of doing business. The uncomfortable truth is that Europe has missed the boat on the internet. That ship has sailed. The question is, will they miss the boat on AI? All signs point to yes. The EU AI Act is the strictest in the world, while the US is taking a wait-and-see approach to let the technology flourish, and China is pouring state funds into it, while censoring the output, of course. Europe is focusing on risk categorization. It's like trying to win a Formula One race by having the best brakes. Yes, brakes are important, but if you don't have an engine, you aren't going to win. We are staring down the barrel of a future where Europe becomes a digital colony. Europeans will drive cars with Chinese software, scroll on American social media, store their data in American clouds, and ask American AI for medical advice. The value, the data, the profits, the power will flow out of the continent. Europe will just be the consumer, the user, the product. I know there are some devs and engineers watching this. I want to hear your horror stories. Have you tried to raise VC funding in Europe? Did you move to the US for a salary bump? Or are you fighting the good fight in Berlin or Lisbon? Drop a comment below. I want to know if I'm being too pessimistic or if it's actually this bad. But why is it so hard to scale? I mentioned the different languages, but surely the single market, the crown jewel of the EU, solved the trade barriers, right? Wrong. In the next section, we're going to expose the single market myth. We're going to find out why selling a service from Paris to Berlin is still harder than selling a taco from Texas to Maine. 8. The single market. Myth. Imagine you are a bottle of French wine. Your life is amazing. You get bottled in Bordeaux, loaded onto a truck and driven across the border to Germany. No one stops you. No one asks for your passport. No one charges a tariff. You arrive in a supermarket in Munich, get bought by a happy Bavarian, and get consumed. Easy. Seamless. The European dream. Now imagine you are the French accountant who balances the books for that winery. You want to move to Munich and offer your accounting services to German small businesses. You pack your bags, jump on the train, and hit a brick wall. The German authorities tell you your French degree isn't fully recognised. You need to pass a local exam in German legal terminology. You need to register with the local Chamber of Commerce, which requires a physical address, which requires a German bank account, which requires a German tax ID, which requires a physical address. Then, you find out that German law requires accountants to have specific liability insurance that can only be bought from German insurers, who won't cover you because you don't have a German credit history. Welcome to the single market myth. The European Union loves to brag about its single market of 450 million consumers. They call it their greatest achievement, and for goods, physical stuff like cars, cheese and machinery, it largely is. But here is the dirty secret. We don't live in an economy of goods anymore. We live in an economy of services. Services, everything from architecture to consulting, software, banking and healthcare, make up roughly 75% of the EU's GDP. And for services, the single market simply does not exist. It is a fantasy. A ghost story told to foreign investors to trick them into thinking Europe is like the United States. In the US, if you are a lawyer or a consultant in New York, you can pretty easily do business with a client in Texas. Sure, there are some state bar exams for lawyers, but generally commerce flows freely. You use the same language, the same contract law principles, the same currency, and the same digital platforms. In Europe, selling services across a border is like trying to sell ice to a polar bear who demands the ice be certified by 3 different ministries of frozen water. Let's look at the Services Directive of 2006. This was supposed to be the law that tore down the walls. The goal was simple: make it as easy to offer services across Europe as it is to sell goods. But as soon as it was proposed, the protectionist instincts of the member states kicked in. The French specifically freaked out. They coined the term the Polish plumber. The fear was that cheap, hard-working plumbers from Poland would flood into France, undercut the French plumbers, and destroy the French way of life, which apparently relies heavily on expensive plumbing. This hysteria led to the directive being watered down until it was meaningless. They carved out so many exceptions for healthcare, for transport, for services of general interest, that the Swiss cheese had more holes than cheese. The result today is national protectionism disguised as quality control. Let's take a concrete example: pharmacy. If the single market were real, a giant efficient online pharmacy from the Netherlands, like Doc Morris, should be able to sell aspirin and prescription drugs to customers in Germany or France at a discount. But Germany says, "Nein, to sell medicine, you must have a physical presence. You must be a pharmacist owned by a pharmacist." They claim this is for patient safety. In reality, it is to protect the cartel of local German apothecaries who charge 300% markups on basic drugs. The EU courts have fought battles over this, but the non-tariff barriers remain huge. Or look at digital services. Why can't I, as a European citizen, buy a cheaper Netflix subscription from Romania if I live in Ireland? Why can't I buy cheaper car insurance from a provider in Lithuania if I live in Belgium? Why can't I get a mortgage from a Spanish bank for a house in Paris? Because of geo-blocking and fragmented regulations. Every country has its own consumer protection laws. This sounds nice, but it means a company like Amazon or Spotify has to comply with 27 different rulebooks. If you are a French startup trying to sell a subscription service to 27 countries, you need to update your terms and conditions 27 times. You need to handle 27 different VAT, sales tax regimes. The VAT MOS system, Mini One Stop Shop, was supposed to fix this, but it's still a nightmare. If you sell digital goods, you have to charge the VAT rate of the customer's country, not your own. So you, a small startup founder, need to know the current tax rate in Bulgaria, Cyprus and Malta just to sell a PDF ebook. This friction kills growth. It is the scale-up killer we talked about in the last section. A recent report by Enrico Letta, a former Italian Prime Minister tasked with investigating why the single market is failing, confirmed what businesses have known for years: the single market is stuck. He pointed out that while the integration of goods has stalled, the integration of services, energy and finance has actually gone backward in some areas. Let's look at the professional guilds. Europe is still medieval in how it organises professions. In countries like Germany, Austria and Italy, many jobs are protected by guilds. Kehrmann. Want to be a chimney sweep in Germany? You can't just buy a brush and start sweeping. You need to be a master chimney sweep. The country is divided into districts, Kehrbezirke, and each district is a monopoly assigned to one master. You literally cannot hire a cheaper competitor because they are illegal in your district. This system protects the insiders and screws the consumers. It keeps prices high and innovation low. A Polish chimney sweep with a drone and a robot cleaner? Banned. And then there is the language barrier, which is the ultimate non-tariff barrier. The EU has 24 official languages. You cannot regulate this away. If you want to bid for a public contract to build a school in Hungary, the tender documents are in Hungarian. The proposal must be in Hungarian. If you're a Spanish construction firm, are you going to hire a team of translators just to bid on a project you might not win? No, you stay in Spain. This means public procurement. The trillions of euros government spend is remarkably closed. 95% of public contracts are awarded to domestic companies. So the taxpayer pays more, the local cronies get the contracts, and the efficient foreign companies are locked out. But the most dangerous failure of the single market is in finance. We call this the lack of a capital markets union, CMU. This sounds technical, but it explains why you are poor. In the US, capital flows like water. If a dentist in Florida puts money in his 401k, that money might end up funding a startup in Seattle or a factory in Ohio. The US stock market is a giant pool of money that any company can drink from. In Europe, capital is trapped in national silos. German savings stay in German banks. French savings buy French government bonds. There is no European stock market that rivals the NYSE. If you are a Swedish company, it is hard to tap into the savings of Italian retirees. The plumbing doesn't connect. This means European companies have a higher cost of capital. It is more expensive for them to borrow money than their American rivals. If money costs you 5% and it costs your competitor 2%, you will lose over the long run. The letter report basically screamed, "We are sending $300 billion of European savings to the US every year." Europeans save a lot of money, unlike Americans, who spend everything. But because there are no good investment opportunities in a fragmented Europe, that money gets invested in US Treasury bonds or US tech stocks. Europe is literally funding its own competitors. We are financing the American tech giants that are crushing our own industries because our own financial market is too broken to absorb the capital. It is the definition of insanity. So, when Brussels talks about strategic autonomy, laugh. You cannot be autonomous if your money is funding the other guy's army and your service economy is broken into 27 little fiefdoms. To fix this, the EU would need to strip power away from national governments. They would need a single regulator for telecoms, a single regulator for energy, and a single regulator for finance. But try telling the French telecom regulator or the German energy regulator that they are out of a job. Try telling a national politician that they can no longer protect their local industries from foreign competition. It won't happen. The national interests always win over the collective interest. I'm curious, have you ever tried to work in another European country? Did you have to certify your diploma, translate your birth certificate, and sacrifice a goat to the local bureaucracy just to get a tax number? Share your Kafka-esque nightmare stories in the comments. The most ridiculous one gets a pinned comment. So the market is fragmented, the capital is fleeing, and the services are stuck. But surely the banking system, the bedrock of the economy, is solid. After 2008, they fixed the banks, right? In the next section, we are going to look at the banking doom loop. We will explore why European banks are zombie institutions walking among us, and why your savings might not be as safe as you think. 9. The banking doom loop. I want you to visualize a snake eating its own tail. It is an ancient symbol called the Ouroboros. In mythology, it represents infinity. In the European Union, it represents the doom loop. This is the mechanism that threatens to blow up the euro every few years. It is a toxic, incestuous relationship between European governments and their national banks. Here is how it works. 1. The government needs to borrow money. It issues bonds, debt. 2. The national banks, let's say Italian banks, take your savings deposits and use them to buy these government bonds. Why? Because under EU rules, sovereign debt is considered risk-free. They don't have to hold any capital against it. It looks like free money. 3. The crisis hits. Investors get nervous about the government's debt, like in 2011. The value of the bonds crashes. 4. The banks wobble. Suddenly the banks have a massive hole in their balance sheet because the bonds they hold are worth less. The banks look like they might collapse. 5. The bailout. The government cannot let the banks fail because they hold your savings. So the government borrows more money to bail out the banks. 6. The vicious cycle. Because the government borrowed more money, its debt is even higher, so its bonds crash further, so the banks get even weaker. And round we go, until the snake chokes on its own tail, and the ECB has to step in and print €1 trillion to stop the heart attack. This is the sovereign bank nexus. And despite 15 years of promises, Europe hasn't fixed it. Let's compare this to the United States to see how truly dysfunctional it is. In 2008, when the financial crisis hit, the US government forced the banks to take equity injections, TARP, cleaned up their balance sheets, and let the weak ones die or get eaten. It was brutal, but it was quick. Today, US banks like JP Morgan Chase are fortresses. They are profitable, massive, and dominate global finance. Europe, on the other hand, chose forbearance. They didn't want to admit how bad the rot was. They let zombie banks stay alive, banks that are technically solvent but too weak to lend money to the real economy. Look at the stock price of Deutsche Bank. In 2007, one share was worth over $100. Today, it hovers around 12 to 15. That is a destruction of value that makes crypto look stable. Or look at Credit Suisse, RIP, a 167-year-old institution that collapsed over a weekend in 2023 because of sheer incompetence and scandal. The problem is that European banks are not European, they are national champions in disguise. If a bank fails in Texas, the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, steps in. The cost is borne by the entire American banking system. It's not a Texas problem, it's a federal issue. If a bank fails in Italy, it is an Italian problem. The Italian government has to fix it. But if the Italian government is already broke, who fixes the fixer? This is why the EU tried to create a banking union. They managed to create a single supervisor. The ECB now watches the big banks. But they failed to create the most important part, EDIS, European Deposit Insurance Scheme. EDIS is the idea that a German saver should guarantee the deposit of a Greek saver. You can imagine how popular this idea is in Berlin. The Germans say, "Nein, we will not insure your deposits until you clean up your banks. You have too many bad loans, non-performing loans." Why should Hans pay for Giuseppe's bad business decisions? The Italians say, "We can't clean up the bad loans until the economy grows, and the economy won't grow until you ensure the system to stop the panic. You are trapping us." So, we have a stalemate, a half-built house with no roof, and the storm clouds are gathering. And the victims of this zombie banking system are, you guessed it, startups and SMEs, small and medium enterprises. Because European banks have thin profit margins and are terrified of risk, they don't lend to innovation, they lend to real estate. If you want a mortgage to buy an overpriced apartment in Paris, the bank will roll out the red carpet. The asset is tangible, it's safe. If you want a loan to build a new AI software company, the bank manager will laugh you out of the room. Where is the collateral? Can we repossess your code? This connects back to the tech void. In the US, companies get funding from capital markets, investors. In Europe, companies rely on bank loans. But the banks are broken, so the companies starve. It is a credit crunch that never ended. And here is the terrifying part. The doom loop is getting tighter. Since the pandemic, European banks have bought more of their own government's debt, not less. In Italy and Spain, domestic banks hold a massive percentage of the national debt. If we have another sovereign debt crisis, if investors suddenly decide that France or Italy can't pay their bills, the banks will go down instantly. And this time, with debt levels already at 100% or 140% of GDP, the governments might not be able to save them. The only backstop left is the European Central Bank. But the ECB is currently fighting inflation. It can't just print money forever without turning the euro into confetti. So Europe is sitting on a powder keg. The fuse is the national debt, and the match is the banking system. And the politicians are just hoping it doesn't blow up on their watch. Quick poll. Do you trust your bank? If there was a crisis tomorrow, do you think your government could actually guarantee your savings up to $100,000 as promised? Or would the ATM screen just say, "out of order"? Let me know if you keep some cash under the mattress. I won't tell the tax man. Now, you might think, okay, the economy is a mess, the banks are zombies, and the demographics are collapsing. But at least Europe is safe, right? We have NATO. We are a geopolitical power. Well, grab your helmet. In the next section, we are going to look at the defense freeloader problem. We will discuss how Europe outsourced its survival to the United States, allowed its armies to rust, and is now waking up to a world of wolves with nothing but a strongly worded letter in its hand. 10. The defense freeloader problem. I want to tell you a story that sounds like a joke from a Monty Python sketch, but it actually happened during a NATO exercise in 2014. A unit of the German army, the Bundeswehr, once the most feared fighting force on the continent, was conducting a joint exercise. They were short on equipment. So to simulate a heavy machine gun on top of their armoured vehicle, the soldiers took a broomstick, painted it black, and stuck it in the turret. A broomstick. This is the state of European defence. The geopolitical superpower was defending its eastern flank with cleaning supplies. This is the defence freeloader problem. For the last 30 years, Europe has been on a holiday from history. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Europe collectively sighed and said, well, that's it. We won. Peace forever. They cashed in the peace dividend. Governments across the continent slashed military budgets. They took the billions they used to spend on tanks, missiles and artillery, and they spent it on pensions, healthcare and free university. It was a sweet deal. Europeans got to enjoy 35-hour work weeks, 6 weeks of paid vacation, and generous welfare states. But who was guarding the door while they were napping? The United States of America. There is a popular meme on the internet that says, "Americans don't have free healthcare so that Europeans can have free healthcare." It hurts because it's true. The US spends roughly 3.5% of its massive GDP on defence. For decades, most European countries struggled to spend even 1%. They outsourced their survival to the Pentagon. They assumed that if the Russian bear ever woke up, Uncle Sam would fly across the Atlantic like Superman and save the day. This created a culture of strategic infantilism. Europeans forgot how to think about hard power. They convinced themselves that the world had changed, that military force was obsolete, that all conflicts could be solved with soft power, diplomacy, trade deals, and sternly worded letters from Brussels. Josep Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief, famously called Europe a garden and the rest of the world a jungle. The implication was that the garden was civilized and safe. But he forgot that if you don't have a fence and a guard dog, the jungle will eventually eat the garden. And then, on February 24th, 2022, the jungle walked in. Vladimir Putin's tanks rolled into Ukraine, and the holiday from history ended with a bang. The panic in European capitals was palpable. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz gave a historic speech announcing a Zeitenwende, turning point. He promised a special fund of $100 billion to modernize the German military. Everyone cheered. Europe was waking up. But here we are, years later. What has happened to that $100 billion? Most of it hasn't been spent. It is stuck in the bureaucratic gears of the procurement office in Koblenz. The state of the German military, the economic engine of Europe, is genuinely shocking. Ammunition. At the start of the Ukraine war, leaked reports suggested Germany had enough ammunition for 2 days of high-intensity combat. 2 days. After that, they would be throwing rocks or broomsticks. Radios. German troops are still using analog radios from the 1980s that represent a security risk because the Russians can easily intercept them. They tried to order digital radios, but they realized the new radios didn't fit in the old vehicles. You can't make this up. Tanks. Of the roughly 300 Leopard 2 tanks Germany owns, only a fraction are combat-ready at any given time due to maintenance backlogs and lack of spare parts. And it's not just Germany. The British Royal Navy is so short on sailors that they have to decommission ships just to crew the new ones. The French have a highly capable military, but it is small. They have sample armies, they have a little bit of everything, tanks, jets, nukes, but no depth. In a high-intensity war of attrition like we see in Ukraine, France would run out of missiles in weeks. So why can't they just print money and buy weapons? Because of fragmentation and national ego. This is the unanimity trap applied to tanks. In the United States, there is one main battle tank, the M1 Abrams. In Europe, there are 17 different types of main battle tanks. In the US, there are roughly 30 types of major weapon systems, fighter jets, destroyers, etc. In Europe, there are 178. This is a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to coordinate a war where the Spanish ammo doesn't fit the Italian guns, and the French mechanic doesn't know how to fix the German engine. Why is it like this? Because every country wants to protect its own national champion defence company. France wants you to buy Dassault, Rafale jets. Germany wants you to buy Rheinmetall, Leopard tanks. Italy wants you to buy Leonardo. So instead of pooling their resources to build one amazing European tank or one amazing European drone, they build 3 mediocre ones that are incompatible with each other. They value jobs in my district over ability to win a war. And when they do try to collaborate, it's a disaster. Look at the FCAS, Future Combat Air System. It's supposed to be the 6th generation fighter jet built by France, Germany and Spain. It is currently stuck in hell. France and Germany are fighting over who gets the patents, who gets the jobs and who is in charge. By the time they finish arguing, the US will probably have already deployed the 7th generation, and China will have cloned it. This leaves Europe with no choice but to buy American. When panic hit in 2022, what did Germany do? Did they wait for a European solution? No. They bought F-35 jets from Lockheed Martin, Poland bought Abrams tanks from the US and K2 tanks from South Korea. Europe's defence industry is so atrophied that it literally cannot produce weapons fast enough. It takes years to spin up a production line for artillery shells. The factories were closed, the skilled welders retired, and this leads to the ultimate anxiety. Europe has no plan B. If the US president wakes up one morning and decides, you know what, I'm tired of paying for Europe's defence, I'm pulling the troops home. Europe is defenceless. There is no European army. There is no EU nuclear umbrella. France has nukes, but they have never explicitly said they would use them to defend Estonia or Poland. Europe is a 450 million person economic bloc that is effectively a protectorate of the United States. This creates a weird psychological complex. Europeans often look down on Americans as gun-obsessed cowboys. They criticize US foreign policy constantly, but deep down, they know that their entire way of life, their safety, their democracy, their ability to sip, espresso in a piazza depends on those cowboys keeping the wolves at bay. It is a relationship of resentment and dependency. And right now, the US is looking at the Pacific. America cares about China. That is the peer competitor. Europe is becoming a strategic distraction, a museum that needs guarding. The US is gently, and sometimes not so gently, telling Europe, grow up, buy your own guns, we are busy. But Europe is finding that growing up is expensive and politically unpopular. If you want to reach 2% or 3% of GDP on defence, you have to cut something else. Do you cut pensions? Do you cut healthcare? Do you raise taxes? In a continent with an ageing population, see Section 5, cutting pensions is political suicide. So the leaders make grand speeches about strategic autonomy, but the budgets don't match the rhetoric. They are hoping the war in Ukraine ends, Russia goes away, and they can go back to sleep. But history doesn't work that way. The peace dividend is gone, the bill is due, and Europe's credit card is maxed out. I have to ask the Americans in the audience, does it annoy you that your tax dollars defend countries that often criticize the US? Or do you think it's the price of being a global superpower? And for the Europeans, would you support cutting your healthcare budget to buy more tanks? Let's start a fight in the comments. So, we have a defenseless continent, an economic stagnation, and a demographic crisis. But surely the politicians are working together to solve this. Surely they are united in the face of these existential threats. In the next section, we're going to dive into the migration political paralysis. We will look at the issue that is arguably doing more to tear the Union apart than any economic statistic. The inability to agree on who gets to enter the garden. 11. The migration political paralysis. I want you to picture an island. It's a tiny speck of rock in the Mediterranean, closer to Africa than it is to Rome. It has beautiful beaches, crystal clear water, and a population of about 6,000 fishermen and hotel owners. Its name is Lampedusa. In September 2023, in the span of just 48 hours, roughly 7,000 migrants arrived on this island on rickety wooden boats. The number of new arrivals was larger than the entire population of the island. The reception centre, built for 400 people, was overflowing. People were sleeping on the streets. The local mayor declared a state of emergency. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was a failure of policy. It was the physical manifestation of the migration political paralysis. If the euro is the economic fault line of the Union, migration is the emotional one. It is the issue that wins elections, topples governments, and makes civilized nations put up razor-wire fences in the middle of fields. The tragedy of European migration policy is that it is stuck in a permanent state of crisis management, because the member states fundamentally disagree on what the Union is for. Is the EU a humanitarian superpower that welcomes the wretched of the earth? Or is it a fortress designed to protect the cultural heritage and living standards of its citizens? Because it cannot answer this question, it fails at both. Let's go back to 2015. The Syrian civil war is raging. Over 1 million people literally walk, across the Balkans and into the heart of Europe. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, makes the most consequential decision of the 21st century. She says, "Wir schaffen das. We can manage this." She opens the borders. It was a moment of immense humanitarian grace. It was also a political earthquake. While the international press cheered, the internal machinery of Europe broke. The Dublin regulation, the rule that says a migrant must claim asylum in the first EU country they enter, collapsed. Under the Dublin rules, Italy and Greece are supposed to process everyone, but Italy and Greece said, "We're drowning, we can't handle this." So they just stopped fingerprinting people and let them take the train north to Germany and Sweden. This created a massive rift between the East and the West. Countries like Poland, Hungary and Slovakia looked at the chaos in Germany, the crowded gyms, the sudden strain on social services, the spike in crime headlines, and said, "No, we're not doing this." When Brussels tried to impose mandatory quotas, telling Hungary they had to take 2,000 migrants to share the burden, Viktor Orbán essentially told Brussels to go to hell. He built a fence, he defied the EU courts, and his popularity at home skyrocketed. This is the political paralysis. To fix the migration system, you need a common agreement on asylum rules, but you can't get an agreement because the issue is too toxic. The West, Germany, France, wants solidarity, everyone takes some migrants. The East, Poland, Hungary, wants security, nobody enters. The South, Italy, Greece, just wants the boats to stop or the money to flow. So, instead of a solution, we get Fortress Europe. Since they can't agree on how to distribute the people who arrive, the only thing they can agree on is trying to stop them from arriving in the first place. This has turned the EU, the champion of human rights, into an entity that pays dictators to act as its bouncer. The EU signed a deal with Turkey, giving Erdogan billions to keep Syrians in Turkey. They signed a deal with Tunisia. They signed a deal with militias in Libya. Basically, Europe says, "Here is a bag of cash. Please keep these people away from our cameras. We don't care how you do it, just don't let them cross the sea." It is a moral stain. We have reports of Libyan coastguards, funded by the EU, dragging people back to detention centres where torture is rampant. But European leaders accept it because the alternative, open borders, is political suicide. And this brings us to the integration failure. The problem isn't just the arrival, it's what happens next. Europe has struggled profoundly to integrate non-European immigrants. Unlike the US, which has a melting pot identity, you can become American just by believing in the idea of America. European identity is rooted in blood, soil and history. You can live in Germany for 30 years, speak perfect German and pay taxes, but many people will still ask you, "No, where are you really from?" This alienation creates parallel societies. Go to the banlieues, suburbs of Paris like Saint-Denis. Go to Molenbeek in Brussels. Go to Rinkeby in Stockholm. These are neighbourhoods that feel like different planets. High unemployment, high crime, and a deep sense of resentment against the state. In Molenbeek, it famously took police months to find the terrorist behind the 2015 Paris attacks, even though they were hiding in plain sight, because the community did not trust the police enough to talk. The rise of the far right is directly correlated to these failures. In France, Marine Le Pen's National Rally is no longer a fringe party. It is a government in waiting. In Germany, the AfD, Alternative for Germany, is polling ahead of the ruling parties in some states. In the Netherlands, Geert Wilders won the election. What is their number one issue? Migration. They argue that the traditional parties have lost control of the borders and that European culture is under threat, and whether you agree with them or think they are racists, you cannot deny that they are tapping into a very real fear among the electorate. The voters look at the numbers, millions of arrivals, and then look at the housing crisis, the strained healthcare systems, and the occasional horrific act of violence, and they say, "Stop." But here is the grand paradox we mentioned in Section 5. The economy needs them. Remember the demographic death spiral. Germany needs 400,000 workers a year. They need immigrants to wipe the bottoms of the elderly and build the houses. So the business lobby is screaming, "Let them in, we need workers." The voters are screaming, "Yeah, keep them out, we want safety." The politicians are trapped in the middle, so they do the most European thing possible, hypocrisy. They talk tough on borders to please the voters, "We will deport illegal migrants," while quietly issuing work visas or turning a blind eye to the black market labour that keeps the agricultural sector running to please the businesses. In Italy, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni was elected on a hardline naval blockade promise. Once in power, did she stop migration? No, she actually increased the quota for foreign workers because Italian factories were begging for staff. It is a schizophrenic policy. And the result is a system that pleases no one. The migrants suffer because they are forced into the hands of smugglers and risk drowning in the Mediterranean. The citizens suffer because the system feels chaotic and lawless. The businesses suffer because they can't get legally processed workers fast enough. And the Schengen area, the zone of passport-free travel that allows you to drive from Portugal to Poland without stopping, is dying. Germany has reintroduced border checks with Poland and Austria. France checks trains coming from Italy. The walls are going back up inside Europe because the external wall is leaking. If Schengen falls, the single market takes a massive hit. Trucks waiting at borders means higher cost for your groceries. The paralysis is total. The EU recently passed a migration pact after years of arguing. It claims to fix everything by creating fast-track border procedures and solidarity mechanisms. But most experts agree it's just more papering over the cracks. It assumes that countries will voluntarily take migrants or pay into a fund. It assumes that rejected asylum seekers can be easily deported, which is almost impossible if their home country refuses to take them back. It is a bureaucratic fantasy designed to get the current leaders through the next election cycle. Meanwhile, in the Sahel region of Africa, just south of the Sahara, instability and climate change are pushing more people north. The numbers we saw in 2015 might be a dress rehearsal for what happens when a continent of 1.5 billion people, Africa, faces a climate crisis next door to a shrinking, wealthy continent. Europe has built a very nice house with an unlocked door, and the family inside is arguing about who should do the dishes while the lawn is catching fire. This is the most controversial topic in Europe, so let's handle it with respect in the comments. But I want to know, do you think a country has a moral obligation to accept refugees, even if it changes the culture? Or is the government's only duty to its own citizens? There is no easy answer, but I want to hear yours. So, the borders are a mess, the people are angry, and the workforce is shrinking. But at least the government is stepping in to save the industries we do have, right? Well, that depends on your definition of save. In the next section, we're going to talk about addicted to state subsidies. We will look at how Europe keeps dying companies on life support, turning the economy into a graveyard of national champions that are too sick to compete, but too politically important to die. 12. Addicted to state subsidies. Imagine you're running a marathon. You're fit, you trained hard, and you bought the best running shoes. You are ready to win. But just as the starting gun fires, the race organisers drive up in a golf cart, pick up the guy next to you, who is smoking a cigarette and eating a cheeseburger, and drive him 20 miles down the road. They drop him off right near the finish line. You scream, "That's cheating!" The organisers shrug and say, "No, that's industrial policy. We couldn't let him lose. He's a national champion." Welcome to the European economy, where the winners are often picked by politicians, not by the market. This is the addiction to state subsidies, and it is turning Europe into a graveyard of zombie companies, businesses that are too sick to compete but too politically connected to die. For decades, the European Union had one golden rule that actually worked: the ban on state aid. The deal was simple. The French government couldn't just give €1 billion to Peugeot, and the German government couldn't just write a cheque to Siemens, because that would be unfair to a carmaker in Italy, or a factory in Poland who didn't get a cheque. It was the bedrock of fair competition. Margrethe Vestager, the competition commissioner, was the sheriff. She was famous for forcing companies like Apple and Amazon to pay back tax breaks that she deemed illegal state aid. She was terrifying. But then came COVID-19. When the pandemic hit, the EU panicked. They suspended the state aid rules to stop the economy from collapsing. It's just temporary, they said, just to keep the lights on. But like a temporary tax or a temporary bridge, there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. When the energy crisis hit in 2022, they extended the rules. When the US passed the Inflation Reduction Act, they loosened them again. The floodgates broke. Suddenly, governments were pouring billions into their favourite companies. And here is where the single market we talked about earlier completely breaks down. Subsidies require money. Germany has deep pockets, France has deep pockets, Italy, Spain, Greece, they are broke. So since 2022, Germany and France have accounted for roughly 75% of all state aid approved in the EU. Think about that. 2 countries are handing out 3/4 of the cash. If you are a German chemical company, the government pays your gas bill. If you are an Italian chemical company, you pay market price. Who wins? The German one. Not because they are smarter or more efficient, but because they have a sugar daddy in Berlin. This isn't a single market anymore, it's a subsidy race where the richest country wins. Let's look at the most egregious example of corporate welfare in history, Alitalia. Alitalia was the Italian national airline. It was a cultural icon. The Pope flies Alitalia. The pasta on board was decent, but as a business, it was a disaster. Alitalia did not make a profit for 20 years. Let me repeat that. 2 decades of losing money, every single year. In a normal capitalist system, like the US, Alitalia would have gone bankrupt in 2002. Its planes would have been sold to Lufthansa or Ryanair, its slots would have been auctioned off, and the market would have moved on. Pan Am failed, TWA failed. It happens. But in Europe, you cannot let a national symbol die. It would be humiliating. What would the voters say? So, the Italian government pumped $10 billion of taxpayer money into Alitalia over the years to keep it flying. That is $10 billion that didn't go to schools, didn't go to hospitals, and didn't go to tax cuts. It was literally incinerated in jet fuel to fly empty planes so the unions wouldn't strike. Finally, in 2021, they shut it down and immediately launched a new airline called ITA Airways. Same planes, same staff, same uniforms, just a new coat of paint. And guess what? It's still struggling, and they are now trying to sell it to Lufthansa. This is the zombie trap. By keeping dying companies alive, you prevent the creative destruction that drives capitalism. If you protect a 100-year-old steel mill that loses money, you are trapping capital and skilled labour in a dying industry. Those engineers should be working at a green tech startup. That capital should be funding an AI lab. Instead, Europe is obsessively focused on preserving the industrial past. Look at the automotive industry. European car makers, VW, BMW, Stellantis, are terrified of Chinese EVs. BYD and MG are shipping cars to Europe that are better and cheaper than the European equivalents. So, what is the European response? Is it to innovate faster, to cut costs, to build better software? No. It is to impose tariffs and demand subsidies. They want the government to protect them from competition. They want cash for clunkers schemes. They want bailouts. But propping up Volkswagen won't make it Tesla. It just delays the inevitable. The US government let General Motors go bankrupt in 2009. It was a managed bankruptcy, yes, but shareholders were wiped out, bondholders took a haircut, and the company had to restructure. It was painful medicine. Europe refuses to take the medicine. It treats the economy with painkillers. This mindset leads to picking winners. Bureaucrats in Brussels or Paris sit in a room and decide, we will build a European Google, we will build a European cloud, we will build a European battery giant. They launch massive projects like Gaia X, the European cloud. Billions of euros, hundreds of meetings, and the result? A PowerPoint presentation and a committee. Gaia X is a mess. It has produced almost nothing of value. Why? Because governments are terrible at being venture capitalists. They bet on safe options. They bet on incumbents. They bet on companies with good lobbyists, not good products. When you subsidize the incumbents, you accidentally kill the startups. If you're a small battery startup with a revolutionary new technology, you can't compete with the giant battery factory next door that just got a $500 million grant from the government. You get crowded out. This is why Europe has no big tech. The big tech of tomorrow is being strangled by the big industry of yesterday. And let's not forget the moral hazard. If corporate executives know the government will save them, they take stupid risks. Or worse, they don't take any risks at all because they don't need to. They just focus on rent-seeking, spending money on lobbying to keep the subsidy tap flowing. It creates a culture where success depends on who you know in the ministry, not what you build in the factory. We are seeing this right now with the Green Deal. Europe is throwing money at hydrogen. They want to be the hydrogen leader, but the market isn't there yet. The physics are difficult, but because the politicians decided hydrogen is the future, billions are flowing into projects that might never make economic sense. It is a command economy disguised as a market economy, and the cost is borne by you, the taxpayer. Every euro spent bailing out a zombie airline is a euro taken from your pocket. Every tariff placed on a cheap Chinese car to protect an expensive French one is a tax on your commute. Europe is becoming a protected nature reserve for legacy industries, a place where companies go to retire on the government dime. But the young, hungry talent, the people who don't want to work for a zombie, They are looking at this rigged game and voting with their feet. Be honest. If you were the Prime Minister, would you let your national airline go bankrupt? Would you let thousands of people lose their jobs to make the economy more efficient? It's easy to say yes in theory, but hard to do in practice. Let me know if you have the stomach for it in the comments. So, the money is stuck in the past. The regulations are suffocating, the taxes are high. If you are a brilliant young scientist, a top-tier engineer, or a visionary entrepreneur, why would you stay? In the next section, we are going to follow the talent. We are going to explore the accelerationist brain drain and why the smartest people in Europe are booking one-way tickets to the United States. 13. The accelerationist brain drain. I want to introduce you to a guy named Patrick. Patrick grew up in rural Ireland. He was a brilliant coder. He won the Young Scientist of the Year award. He was exactly the kind of person the European Union claims it wants to nurture, a homegrown genius. So, what did Patrick do? Did he start a tech giant in Dublin? Did he build the future of finance in Frankfurt? No. He bought a plane ticket to San Francisco, founded Stripe, and became one of the youngest billionaires in history. Patrick Collison and his brother John is the poster child for the accelerationist brain drain. It is the most painful export Europe has. We export our IQ. We spend billions of euros of taxpayer money educating these kids. We give them free healthcare, subsidized university degrees, and safe neighborhoods to grow up in. We invest in them for 22 years, and then, just as they are about to become productive, just as they are about to start companies, pay taxes, and invent the future, they leave. We hand-wrap this human capital and ship it to the United States free of charge. It is the largest transfer of wealth from Europe to America, and it doesn't show up on any trade balance sheet. Why are they leaving? The politicians will tell you it's about lifestyle or culture. They are lying. It is about ambition and math. Let's talk about the math first. If you are a top-tier AI engineer graduating from a university in Paris or Munich today, your starting salary might be $55,000 to $65,000. That's a decent living. You can buy nice wine and rent a small apartment. If you take that exact same skill set to Silicon Valley, your starting compensation package, salary plus stock, is likely $250,000 to $300,000. That is not a gap. That is a different universe. Even when you adjust for the cost of living, yes, rent in San Francisco is insane, and healthcare, yes, the US system is expensive, the difference is still life-changing. In the US, you can become a millionaire in your 30s just by being a good engineer. In Europe, you become comfortable. But for the smartest people, the 10x engineers, money is often secondary. They care about impact. This is the accelerationist part. If you want to build a rocket to Mars, you go to SpaceX. If you want to build the most advanced LLM, large language model, you go to OpenAI or Anthropic. If you want to cure cancer with mRNA, you might start in Germany, like BioNTech, but you will likely need US capital to scale. The US acts as a particle accelerator for talent. You enter the machine, and you are smashed together with other brilliant people, unlimited capital, and a culture that says yes. Europe acts as a speed bump. I spoke to a researcher recently who left a prestigious European university for a lab in Boston. I asked him why. He said, "In Europe, I spent 40% of my time writing grant applications to the EU Commission, trying to justify why my research fits into Horizon 2020 Pillar 3 social goals. In the US, I spend 90% of my time in the lab." Europe has bureaucratized curiosity. We have turned our scientists into paper pushers. The sheer weight of the administration drives them insane. They don't want to fill out compliance forms. They want to discover things. And then there is the tall poppy syndrome we touched on earlier. In many European academic circles, there is a weird ceiling on ambition. If you say, "I want to commercialize this research and become a billionaire," your colleagues look at you like you just farted at a funeral. It's seen as vulgar. Academia is supposed to be pure. In Stanford or MIT, if you don't have a startup on the side, people ask if you're okay. This cultural difference is lethal. Look at the statistics. A recent report showed that human capital flows from Europe to the US are 3 times higher than the reverse. We are bleeding our best minds. And it's not just the tech bros, it's doctors, it's pilots, it's financiers. The NHS in the UK is hemorrhaging doctors to Australia and Canada. Why? Better pay, better hours, better weather. German pilots are going to the Middle East. This creates a demographic negative feedback loop. Remember the aging population? Who is going to pay the taxes to support the millions of retirees, the high earners? But if the high earners leave, the tax burden falls on the middle class. So the middle class gets squeezed, so they try to leave too. And eventually you are left with a population of retirees and people who aren't mobile enough to leave. It's a recipe for a slow, comfortable decline. The EU tries to fix this with, you guessed it, more programs. They have Erasmus for entrepreneurs, they have the European Research Council, but they are trying to water a plant that is planted in toxic soil. You can pour as much water, money as you want, but if the soil, the regulatory and tax environment is bad, the plant won't grow. Let's look at the employee stock options again, because this is the specific mechanism that kills European startups. In the US, you join a startup, you get equity. If the company hits it big, you get rich. This aligns everyone's incentives. The receptionist at Google became a millionaire. In Germany, until very recently, you were taxed on stock options when you received them, based on a theoretical value, even if you couldn't sell them yet. Imagine paying tax on paper money that might be worth zero in a year. It was insane. Nobody did it. So European startups couldn't attract top talent because they couldn't offer the lottery ticket of equity. They could only offer cash, and they didn't have enough cash. They are trying to fix this now, the Future Financing Act in Germany, but it's too little, too late. The culture is already set. And the final nail in the coffin. Language. The global language of science, tech and business is English. If you're a brilliant Hungarian physicist, you speak English. If you move to the US, you integrate instantly. You can write papers, give talks, and chat at the bar. If you move to France and you don't speak fluent French, you are an outsider. You're a second-class citizen in the office. The US has the ultimate user interface for immigrants. It's plug and play. Europe requires a custom driver installation for every single country. So, the brain drain accelerates, the gap widens, and every time a Patrick Collison leaves Ireland, or a Yann LeCun leaves France, Europe doesn't just lose one person. It loses the ecosystem they would have built. It loses the companies they would have founded, the employees they would have trained, and the taxes they would have paid. We are exporting the seeds of our own future and then buying back the fruit at a premium. This one hits close to home for a lot of people. I want to ask the students and young professionals watching, have you considered moving abroad for work? If you stayed in Europe, why? Was it family, culture, or something else? And if you left, would you ever come back? Let me know in the comments. So the talent is leaving, the economy is stagnant, and the voters are getting angry. This leads to the most volatile mix possible. In the next section, we're going to look at populism versus the technocrats. We will see why the political centre is collapsing, and why making any difficult decision in Europe has become mathematically impossible. 14. Populism versus the technocrats. I want to take you back to a roundabout in rural France in November 2018. A middle-aged man named Jacqueline Moreau posts a video on Facebook. She is furious. She's holding up a high-visibility yellow vest, the kind you keep in your car for emergencies, and she is screaming at the President of France. Why? Because the government raised the tax on diesel fuel by a few cents. To the government in Paris, this was a logical scientific policy. It was a Pigovian tax designed to nudge people toward electric cars and save the planet. The spreadsheet said it was the right thing to do. To Jacqueline and millions of others, it was a declaration of war. They lived in the countryside. They needed their diesel cars to get to work. They couldn't afford a Tesla. The tax wasn't a nudge, it was a slap in the face. Within weeks, Paris was burning. The yellow vest, Gilets jaunes, movement brought the French state to its knees. They smashed luxury storefronts on the Champs-Élysées and spray-painted "The King is Naked" on the Arc de Triomphe. This is the war of populism versus the technocrats. It is the conflict that defines modern European politics. It is the battle between the people who look at the world through spreadsheets and the people who look at the world through their empty wallets. On one side, you have the technocrats. These are the people we talked about earlier. The EU Commission officials, the central bankers, the centrist politicians like Emmanuel Macron or Olaf Scholz. They believe in expertise. They believe that politics is about finding the correct rational solution to a problem. They speak the language of fiscal responsibility, green transition, and multilateralism. They are the anywheres, a term coined by David Goodhart. They're educated, mobile, and comfortable. They can live in London, Berlin, or New York and feel at home. To them, The EU is a great project that makes travel easy and business smooth. On the other side, you have the populists. These are the voters flocking to Marine Le Pen in France, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, or the AfD in Germany. They believe that the experts are frauds who have rigged the system to benefit themselves. They don't care about fiscal responsibility when their local hospital is closing. They are the somewheres. They are rooted in a specific place. They value tradition, nation, and security. To them, the EU is a monster that takes their sovereignty and gives them nothing but regulations. The conflict arises because the technocrats have forgotten how to talk to the somewheres. When the technocrat says, "We must raise energy prices to stop climate change," the populist hears, "I don't care if you freeze to death. I want to look good at the next UN summit." When the technocrat says, "Migration is necessary for our GDP growth," the populist hears, "We are replacing you with cheaper labour to keep wages low for the corporations." This disconnect creates political instability. For 50 years, Europe was boring. You had a centre-right party and a centre-left party. They were basically the same. They swapped power every few years and nothing really changed. It was stable. That world is dead. We are witnessing PASOKification, named after the Greek Socialist Party PASOK, which went from ruling the country to basically 0 votes in a few years. The centre is collapsing. The voters are fleeing to the extremes. Look at the Netherlands. In 2023, a brand new party, the BBB, Farmer Citizen Movement, swept the provincial elections. Who were they? They were angry farmers. The Dutch government, Technocrats, had decided to slash nitrogen emissions to meet EU environmental targets. This meant forcing farmers to sell their land or kill their cows. The farmers said no. They drove thousands of tractors onto the highways. They blocked distribution centres, and the voters backed them. Why? Because the voters saw the technocrats attacking the very people who put food on the table. This leads to fragmentation. European parliaments are becoming ungovernable. In the old days, you needed 2 parties to form a coalition. Now, in the Netherlands or Belgium or Germany, you need 3, 4, or even 7 parties to get a majority. Look at Germany's traffic light coalition, red, green, yellow. It is a disaster. The Greens want to spend money on the environment. The Liberals, FDP, want to cut spending and taxes. They spend all their time fighting each other instead of governing. The result is immobilism. No one can pass big reforms because the coalition will collapse. Want to fix the pension age? The populists will burn the streets. Want to reform the labour market? The unions will strike. Want to cut the budget? The coalition partners will quit. So, the leaders do the only thing they can. Nothing. They manage the status quo. They tinker at the edges. They kick the can down the road, and this fuels the populist fire even more. The voters see that nothing is getting better. They see the trains are late, the schools are crumbling, and the prices are rising. They think democracy is broken. We need a strong man. We are seeing the rise of illiberal democracy. Viktor Orban in Hungary was the pioneer. He created a system where elections happen, but the media and courts are controlled by the ruling party. It is a hybrid regime. Now others are taking notes. Robert Fico in Slovakia. The PiS party in Poland, though they recently lost, the sentiment remains. The technocrats in Brussels are terrified. They try to use rule of law mechanisms to punish these countries, withholding money. But this just validates the populist narrative. See, the unelected elites in Brussels are punishing us for voting the wrong way. They hate our sovereignty. It is a trap. The more Brussels tightens the screws, the more popular the anti-Brussels parties become. And the ultimate irony? The technocrats are often right on the facts. Mathematically, you do need to raise the retirement age. Scientifically, you do need to cut emissions. Economically, you do need migration. But they are politically incompetent. They have no emotional intelligence. They try to impose these things from the top down, treating voters like children who need to take their medicine. And the voters are rebelling. This makes reform a dirty word. In the 2000s, reform meant modernization. Today, reform means you are going to lose your job, pay more tax, and work until you are 75. So Europe is stuck. The necessary changes are politically impossible. The comfortable changes are economically useless. And hovering over all of this is the ghost of the ultimate technocratic dream, the United States of Europe. The elites still believe the solution to every problem is more Europe. Banking crisis. We need a European banking union. Pandemic. We need a European health union. War? We need a European army. But the people are moving in the exact opposite direction. They want less Europe. They want borders. They want control. This fundamental clash between the federalists in the towers and the nationalists in the streets is the final lock on the cage. I want to know where you stand on the anywhere versus somewhere spectrum. Do you feel like a citizen of the world who could live happily in any major city? Or are your roots in your hometown the most important thing to you? There is no wrong answer, but the gap between these two groups is tearing our societies apart. And this leads us to the final heartbreaking conclusion: the dream of a unified continent, the anthem of Ode to Joy, the blue flag with the gold stars. In the final section, we're going to talk about the ever-closer union delusion. We will summarise why the federalist dream is dead and what the future actually looks like for a fractured continent. 15. The ever-closer union delusion. I want you to look at the very first sentence of the Treaty of Rome, signed in 1957. It is the birth certificate of the European Union. It states that the goal is to create an ever-closer union among the peoples of Europe. Those three words, ever-closer union, are the most dangerous words in European politics. They imply a destination. They imply that the EU is not a fixed state of being, but a journey, a train that only moves in one direction, toward a United States of Europe. The founding fathers of the EU, Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, had a brilliant, slightly devious plan. They knew that if they asked the French and Germans in the 1950s, "Do you want to abolish your countries and become one superstate?" the answer would have been hell no. So they adopted the method of functionalism. The idea was, start with something boring, like coal and steel. Merge those industries. Then, because you merge coal, you have to merge trade. Because you merge trade, you have to merge currency. Because you merge currency, you have to merge taxes. They believed that economic integration would inevitably, automatically lead to political union. They thought they could sneak a federation past the voters through the back door of economics. For 60 years, it worked. The bicycle kept moving. But today the bicycle has hit a brick wall, and the rider is still pedaling furiously, smashing his face into the bricks because he doesn't know how to stop. This is the ever-closer union delusion. The fundamental problem, the rot at the core of everything we have discussed in this video, is that there is no European demos. Demos is the Greek word for the people. It is the root of democracy. To have a democracy, you need a people. You need a group of individuals who feel enough solidarity with each other that they are willing to be outvoted. If you are a Democrat in California, and Donald Trump wins the election, you are angry, you might protest, but you generally accept that he is the president, because you accept that the guy in Alabama is part of your political family. You share a language, a history, a media landscape, and a constitution. In Europe, that solidarity does not exist. If a Greek voter is told he has to cut his pension because a German voter demands it, he doesn't think, well, that's democracy. He thinks, this is foreign oppression. If a Dutch voter is told his taxes are going to build a bridge in Sicily, he doesn't feel a warm, fuzzy glow of patriotism. He feels robbed. There is no European public sphere. There is no European New York Times that everyone reads. There is no European CNN that everyone watches. There is no common language. When a crisis hits, the French watch French TV and blame the Germans. The Germans read German papers and blame the Greeks. The narrative is fractured into 27 different realities. The elites in Brussels, the federalists, refuse to accept this. They are true believers. They treat the United States of Europe as a religious destiny. Guy Verhofstadt, a prominent MEP and arch-federalist, famously screams in Parliament that the only solution to every problem is to abolish the veto and create a European army. But they are trying to build a skyscraper from the top down. They built the roof, the currency, and the penthouse, the Parliament, before they built the foundation, the people. And now the structure is groaning under the weight. The reality is that the nation-state is not dead. It is the most resilient political structure ever invented. People like being French. They like being Polish. They want their decisions made in Paris and Warsaw, not in a glass tower in Belgium by people they didn't elect and can't name. This leaves the EU in the halfway trap. It is too integrated to be just a trade alliance, like NAFTA. It is too divided to be a state, like the USA. It is stuck in the uncanny valley of sovereignty. It has a central bank, but no treasury. It has a border agency, Frontex, but no border guards. It has a foreign policy chief, but no army. This half-built design is the worst of both worlds. It strips national governments of the power to solve problems. They can't devalue currency, they can't control borders, but it doesn't give that power to the centre effectively either. So, when things go wrong, no one is in charge. It's not my fault, says the Prime Minister, it's Brussels' fault. It's not my fault, says the EU Commission. The member states didn't implement the directive. It is an accountability black hole. So what happens next? There are 3 scenarios for the future of Europe, and none of them are reform. Scenario 1, the federal leap. The EU states realise they are too small to survive in a world of giants, US, China, India. They voluntarily dissolve their sovereignty and create a true federation. Probability, near zero. The voters will not accept it. Any politician who proposes abolishing France will be guillotined at the ballot box. Scenario 2, the breakup. The tensions become too great. A net contributor country, like the Netherlands or Germany, gets sick of paying for the South. Or a sovereignist country, like France under Le Pen, decides to leave. Frexit, Dexit, the euro collapses. Probability, low but rising. Brexit showed it's possible, but it also showed it's painful. The cost of unwinding the spaghetti bowl of integration is terrifying. Scenario 3, the slow fade, the Venice scenario. This is the most likely. The EU doesn't explode, it doesn't reform, it just stagnates. It becomes a giant open-air museum. It remains rich, comfortable and safe for a long time. The food will be great, the tourists will keep coming, but the relevance will fade. The power will shift to the Pacific. The innovation will happen elsewhere. The population will shrink. Europe will become to the world what Venice is to Europe today. A beautiful, expensive place where people go to look at the past, but not a place where the future is made. The ever-closer union wasn't a lie. It was a dream. A beautiful dream born from the ashes of the deadliest war in human history. It was a noble attempt to transcend human tribalism. But you cannot legislate tribalism away. You cannot regulate a demos into existence. The tragedy of Europe is that it built a machine designed for a world that no longer exists. A world of static diplomacy and slow trade. In the world of AI, hypersonic missiles and demographic collapse, the machine is seizing up, and the captain is still pressing the emergency repair button, waiting for a unanimity that will never come. Final thoughts. So where does that leave us? If you've watched this far, you might think I hate Europe. You might think I'm an American triumphalist or a Eurosceptic doomer. The truth is the opposite. I love Europe. I love the history, the culture, the diversity, the way of life. I want Europe to succeed. The world needs a strong Europe. We need a third pillar of Western democracy to balance the chaos. But true love means telling the truth. And the truth is that the European project is sleepwalking into oblivion. We have covered the unanimity trap that paralyzes decisions, the economic divorce between North and South, the bureaucratic labyrinth that kills innovation, the demographic death spiral that empties the cradles, the defense freeloader mindset that leaves the continent exposed. These aren't just challenges, they are structural failures. The warning lights are flashing red on the dashboard, but the passengers are arguing about the radio station. Can Europe turn it around? History teaches us that Europe is often at its best when it is backed into a corner. The Renaissance came after the plague. The EU itself rose from the ruins of WTS2. But to fix a problem, you first have to admit you have one. You have to admit that you can't regulate your way to growth. You have to admit that you can't defend yourself with soft power. You have to admit that you can't have a currency union without a fiscal union. Until European leaders and European voters are willing to have that brutal, honest conversation, the drift will continue. The sun is setting on the old continent. It will be a beautiful sunset full of golden light and long shadows. But make no mistake, the night is coming. If you found this deep dive valuable, if it scared you, angered you, or just made you think, then I've done my job. This channel is dedicated to exploring the hard truths of economics and geopolitics that the mainstream news often glosses over. Here is what you can do. Hit that subscribe button. It helps me convince the algorithm that long-form intelligent content still has a place on YouTube. Leave a comment. I want to hear your perspective. Are you optimistic about Europe's future? Do you think I missed something? The debate in the comments is often better than the video itself. Check out the playlist on your screen right now. I have a video on the collapse of China's demographics, and another on the US debt time bomb. Thanks for watching, thanks for thinking, and I'll see you in the next one.